Welcome. I'm absolutely pumped to guide you through this explainer today because, well, we're going to look at cloud security through a totally different lens. We're going to treat it exactly like a digital heist. Now, Azure is built with these incredibly robust layers of security from the ground up, right? But here is the truly fascinating thing. You know those massive cloud incidents we always hear about in the news? They don't actually begin with some mastermind attacker breaking Azure's underlying infrastructure, not at all. Instead, they start when an organization accidentally exposes a path right into their own vault. So in this explainer, we're going to walk through a simulated, fully authorized attack path in an isolated lab environment. We'll reveal exactly how these breaches unfold in the real world and, way more importantly, how you can step in and break that chain. Okay, let's dive into this and shatter that Hollywood hacking myth right out of the gate. The myth is that an attacker is sitting in some dark room, furiously typing green code to somehow hack Azure itself. But the reality? Attackers aren't breaking the cloud. They're exploiting your configuration of the cloud. They are literally just walking through doors that were accidentally left wide open. A public IP address over here, an unnecessary management interface over there, or maybe a vulnerable application. These misconfigurations effectively roll out the red carpet, creating a direct, unimpeded path from the public internet straight into your most sensitive cloud resources. So how do they actually find those open doors? Think of it like casing a joint before a bank heist. Attackers, they don't just kick down the front door. They map out the entire attack surface first. It always starts with reconnaissance, like scanning public DNS records and hunting for exposed public IP addresses. Next up, they discover exposed applications or APIs. Then they hunt for that weak network path. Maybe it's a forgotten test virtual machine sitting behind a misconfigured network security group, something that absolutely should never have been reachable from the public internet. And finally, they use that exposure to gain their initial access. The attacker completely maps the attack surface way before they ever attempt an actual exploit. Once they've found that exposed asset, the infiltration begins. Now we're shifting from the network layer down to the application layer. In an authorized simulation, an attacker might target an intentionally vulnerable application. A great example is something like the OWASP Juice Shop, which, if you don't know, is this famous educational tool just packed with deliberate security flaws. What attackers are hunting for are common categories of application vulnerabilities. We're talking broken authentication, authorization problems, insecure APIs, or excessive permissions. These flaws basically act like an unlocked side door to the building. Once they exploit that vulnerability, boom, they've successfully breached the perimeter. They're inside. Now, a lot of folks think the game is completely over once an attacker breaches a web virtual machine. But here is the cloud twist. So the crucial point is, a compromised workload absolutely does not automatically equal full Azure administrator access. But it does bring us to arguably the most important question in cloud security: what identity and permissions does this compromised workload actually have? Because compromising the VM is merely the beginning of the attack. The real prize, that's what the VM is allowed to do next. To really wrap our heads around that, we need to talk about workload identity. A workload identity is an identity assigned directly to a software workload, like our newly compromised test VM. This identity is governed by Azure Role-Based Access Control, which dictates exactly what other cloud resources it's allowed to talk to. And here is the immense danger. If an organization isn't strictly enforcing least privilege, which just means giving a workload only the exact permissions it needs to function and absolutely nothing more, an attacker can hijack this identity. Suddenly, they aren't just an intruder sitting on a test VM, they're impersonating the workload itself. They're using its legitimate, authorized identity to just freely roam around the cloud environment. Let's look at how incredibly fast this lateral movement happens when least privilege isn't enforced. It's kind of scary, actually. At minute 1, that initial web VM is compromised via that vulnerable application we talked about. By minute 3, using the excessive permissions attached to that workload, the attacker has already breached the deeper application subnet. At minute 7, they've hopped over to an internal API that the web VM was loosely permitted to talk to. And by minute 10, they've reached sensitive storage and the core database. In 10 minutes flat, an attacker has hopped from a seemingly harmless, publicly exposed test app directly to your crown jewels. Section 1. The catch. Shifting to the defender's perspective. While the attacker thinks they're moving invisibly through the network like some ghost, they're actually leaving glowing footprints everywhere they step. Let's quickly acknowledge the tools they use to get in. During authorized educational simulations, a red team relies on specific tools for visibility and testing. They use things like Nmap for network enumeration, Burp Suite and OWASP Zap to inspect and test those deliberately vulnerable web apps, and scanners like Nessus or OpenVAS for vulnerability assessment. These are the tools used to map the attack path and execute the infiltration. And this brilliantly illustrates the contrast with the blue team, our defenders. While the attacker is quietly trying to pick locks, the defender has an entire security apparatus lighting up like a Christmas tree. We're talking about Microsoft Defender for Cloud, Microsoft Sentinel for centralized event management, Log Analytics, Intra ID for tracking identity anomalies, and Azure Monitor. The attacker may have slipped in through a tiny obscure network app, but every single one of their actions is triggering loud alarms across multiple interconnected systems. So how do defenders actually catch them? 2 words: telemetry correlation. A single isolated alert about a weird login that might be ignored. A single alert about a random network ping that could easily be missed in the noise. But defenders don't look at isolation. They pull together telemetry from identity logs, network traffic, endpoint behavior, and the Azure control plane. The Security Operations Center correlates all these individual signals to tell the complete, cohesive attack story. They can see the exact path the attacker took, isolate that compromised workload, and shut down the hijacked identity way before the attacker ever reaches that database at minute 10. So, how do we stop this heist from ever happening in the first place? We break the chain with a secured architecture. Step 1. You've got to protect the internet-facing boundary. Use Azure Front Door and a web application firewall to filter out malicious traffic before it even has a chance to hit your app. Step 2. Keep your internal resources off the public internet entirely by using private networks and private endpoints. And Step 3. Secure that identity layer. Implement strict least privilege, utilize Entra ID, conditional access, and enforce multi-factor authentication. This way, if one layer fails, the next layer acts as a brick wall and halts the lateral movement. To really drive this home, if you want to avoid a cloud breach, you absolutely must avoid these 3 fatal Azure mistakes. Number 1, exposing management interfaces directly to the internet. Just don't do it. Number 2, allowing excessive network connectivity between workloads. Look, if virtual machine A doesn't strictly need to talk to virtual machine B to do its job, block the path. And number 3, giving workloads excessive Azure permissions. When these 3 mistakes combine, you aren't just leaving a door open, you are practically drawing a treasure map directly to the vault. Which brings us to the core strategy of this entire explainer. Azure security requires a fundamental mindset shift. It is not just about building a thicker wall around individual resources anymore. You can't just slap a heavy padlock on the database and call it a day. It's about eliminating the entire attack path. You have to secure the network, protect the identity, strictly control the permissions, and constantly monitor the activity. You really have to look at the whole board. And I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought. Whether you're building a brand new application, reviewing your current architecture, or running authorized security tests in your own lab environments, you must continuously ask yourself this one question. If this resource is compromised, where can an attacker go next? If you can answer that question and proactively block that next step, you've just stopped the heist. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep asking those tough questions and stay secure out there.